We're here today with Chief Harvey McLeod of the Upper Nicola Band in British Columbia, Canada. I won't give too much of an introduction. I'll let our guest introduce himself. So such an honor to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being here. And let's just start with a bit of your background and a little bit more about the Upper Nicola Band and the people you represent there.
In the language, it is translated into "Good day, my friends and relatives." And my name is Harvey McLeod, yes. Elmechom, or Chief for Upper Nicola Band, part of the Okanagan Nation in the south central part of BC, British Columbia. This is my 9th year as Chief and about 22, 23 years as a councillor. So I've been involved in council business now for a long, long time. And I represent a community called Upper Nicola. It's 9 reserves. I live on Elkmil or Colshana Indian Reserve number 1. And the other populated reserve we have in our community is Spachman or Douglas Lake Indian Reserve number 3. In total, we have about 30,000 acres, and we have close to 1,000, and I'll say this quote unquote, members, citizens of Upper Nicola. So we are fairly large, mainly a ranching, cattle, farming community. A lot of our people are involved in forestry. So from the time I can remember, that was the basics of how our people survived. Cattle ranches and logging companies. So.
Okay, great. And so, we're here doing this for carbon removals at COP. So maybe you can introduce a little bit about the carbon removal project that you're working on. How big is it? What kind of carbon removal? How does it work?
If you asked me 3 years ago, I wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. It's a very exciting project, and things that we want to do as people, as community, to help our environment. As people, our environment is really important to us, and for the longest of times, 150 years of living in colonization, we were not allowed, or we were discouraged, or we were taken away from the land. And the last few years, we want to do something. We know that the world is changing. The environment is changing. And we talked about it as community. What can we do? What can we do? We have a major pipeline going through the territory, TMX, Trans Mountain. And that was the beginning of us realizing that, hey, we got to get up to speed here on what's happening out there and get involved. The negotiations on Trans Mountain expansion project was a huge one, a huge lesson for me, because I didn't know nothing about pipelines.
Sure.
Where it was coming from, or where it was going, or even what was in the pipe, or how much was going through in the pipeline, because the pipeline's been there for 60, 70 years, but we knew nothing about it. So the negotiations on the expansion really enlightened us, and we became more aware, and some were for and some were against, and some were looking at economic opportunity and some were not. And being the Elmechom, or the chief, I had to sit in the middle and find the best solution for our community and our nation. So with that, and then the atmospheric rivers, the heat domes, the fires that caused so much devastation in the valley, we were keen to take our blinders off and look for new opportunities that are available out there. And doing a lot of work on clean energy, we, as part of negotiations with BC Hydro and the provincial government of British Columbia, we were given an opportunity to develop a 15 megawatt energy project. So after looking at run-of-the-river wind geothermal, and solar, we decided solar. So we are very close to finalizing and building a 15 megawatt solar farm. And it's something that was really educational for us as people. We take for granted when we go into our house and we flip a switch and we got electricity, but we have no idea where it comes from. We don't like dams because of the environmental challenges that it brings, but at the same time, we're really happy that we can go in the house and flick a switch and we have light, or turn on the stove and you can cook. So there are a lot of conveniences that we have as people that we take for granted, but we don't know the consequences of us having them conveniences. So with the solar, it was very educational for me, my leadership team, and community. And not only looking at the environment, but looking at the economic opportunities that come with that. The negotiations with BC Hydro wasn't an easy one. Finding that space where we can agree on an energy purchase agreement at EPA, it wasn't easy. Over probably 3 years of negotiation to finalize that line that they can live with and that we can live with, that they don't have to pay so much, and that the investments that we're making, there will be some economic return to it, to our community and our nation and our partner. So it got us into the economic side of providing cleaner energy. And what's so perfect about it is that 15 megawatt farm is going to be right on our res where I live, in Kalmyk, or in Upper Nicola Indian Reserve number 1. And that's what's so perfect about it. We're not relying on government lands out there. We're going to build it on our own. But that wasn't easy either. We have to negotiate with the federal government to get the leases and the subleases to build this, and working with the federal government and the Department of Justice to come up with a lease that satisfies their interests and satisfies our interests and satisfies the interests of our partners was a difficult one. So a lot of negotiation and a lot of understanding and teaching our partners exactly how we have to do business on reserve. But now we have that done, and we're just in the final stages of finalizing that energy purchase agreement so that we can build this thing. We want to get this thing built. So with that, and then heat domes and the craziness, and us understanding and finding out what an atmospheric river was, because 2 years ago I didn't have a clue what it was, and neither did the people in our community. We heard of the Pineapple Express. It had some other names to it, but nothing with the devastation that came with an atmospheric river. When I first heard it, I was like, what are they talking about? And then as we talked about it more and we seen the devastation that it caused, I said, this is real. This is real, and we lived through a portion of history that people will never forget. Just about a year ago today, when it hit in Nicola. And how it changed our lives. It changed our outlook on how we see the world. Mind you, there's a lot of different theories out there about why it caused so much devastation. Excuse me. But we know that it wasn't the clear cuts. Clear cuts had something to do with it, with the landslides and everything, but it had nothing to do with the amount of rain that came down. Even if all the trees were there still would have been landslides. A lot of land lost. So there's a lot of theories out there in the community about what happened and why it happened. But we're going back to the environment and focusing in on the environment. We don't want to look at the causes down here. We can spend all day and all night and all day and all night talking about that, but very little time talking about what's happening out here. So we, as leaders, focused in on that. Mind you, some of our leaders at home, the 4 communities that were really impacted, 5 communities that were really impacted, are still living in the dungeons of trauma because of what happened. And I totally understand that. But at the same time, pulling them along and saying, let's look. So a couple of years ago, I was introduced to a gentleman, Michael Hutchinson, who was advised by the Premier of British Columbia that he should come and talk to me because of some ideas that he had about carbon capture. He phoned me and we had a chat. I didn't know what he was talking about. I went to visit him up at his plant there in Squamish, and went through the plant and they explained how everything works and looked like a pretty good operation. But what was so comical and funny about that is that when we finished the tour, the engineer that guided or walked me through and explained how everything worked, he asked if I had any questions, and I said no. And he says, "Yeah, do you know everything I told you?" I told him I don't have a clue what you said from the first time you opened your mouth till now, and I still don't. But what gives me confidence is that you know what you're talking about. I know you know what you're talking about. So I can follow you, I can believe you, and I can start dreaming in that space. So when I talked to Michael, I said, yeah, I'm keen on this. And he advised that, yeah, the Premier Horgan said that he should talk to me because of what we needed to build this thing. One of them was electric power. And we are situated where we have probably the largest substation in British Columbia, where all of the electricity produced in British Columbia flows right through our territory. So I said, yeah, let's talk. So we talked. And that's probably the first time in my life that I accepted what was being told to me and had enough trust in what was being shared with me. And for the first time, had belief that there's really two things that are going to happen with this. One, we're going to help the environment. And two, there are going to be some economic opportunities there for us.
Yeah.
There's two things that are going to come from it. So when we talked to community, they were wondering, why are you building this thing here? Build it in Vancouver, build it in Los Angeles, build it in Shanghai, where there's a lot of pollution. They need help down there. We don't need it here. We're okay here. So we answered their questions and said, yeah, land prices in Vancouver or Los Angeles or Shanghai is pretty high. And nor do they have the electric power that we're going to be needing to build this thing. And then they said, okay, let's take the next step. What can we do to get involved? And that wasn't an easy process at all, because when you start dreaming, like I did, this was a dream that I believed in. I knew wasn't going to go away. I know isn't going to go away. We had a lot of dreams ever since I was a kid. I wanted to be a world champion saddle bronc rider. I wanted to have a university education. I wanted to have a nice house. All the things that we wanted as youngsters and teenagers and young adults. But every time the opportunities came, they were taken away. So I quit dreaming. So I told Michael, I want to dream again. And I believe in this one. We shook hands. He said, let's do this then. And it's been a roller coaster of me staying out of the way, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, nor am I a business person, to really understand all of the work that we're going to be needing to do to build this project. I see it as a bunch of big fans pulling in air, and somehow they turn out a little flask of clean fuel. How does that happen? And I'm learning a little bit more as we go into the process. But the agreement that I had with the partners, including our own development corporation, take this. We endorse it. Take it and build it and make this a reality for us. And I will stay, we will stay, council will stay out of your business, but if you need support and help, we're here to help. So for the last couple of years, basically that's what I've done. We needed some political support. I went and got the political support from both the province and the feds. And at the same time, talked with some of the partners that are involved in this, just to get to know them and they get to know me. We did that a few weeks ago where we had the team up from Houston visiting our site and talking about what we had available and how we're going to make everything available and the hard work that is in front of us to make this thing a reality. And we shook hands and said, yeah, we can build this. So it has been a roller coaster and a lot of work by a lot of people. I consider my job the easy part. That's dealing with the politics. And they have the hard job of putting it all together, but I'm thinking now maybe it isn't so hard for them because this is what they do. We have support from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, a huge check mark for us. We need resource or finances to make this thing work. They're on board with us. The feds are on board with us, but we need more from them. And the province right now, they've kind of backed up a little bit, and we've been meeting with the ministers and finding a way on how they can support the project or support Upper Nicola because of the dream that we have. And the meeting that I had with Minister Alston a few weeks ago, there was a commitment that we're going to find something. We're going to find a way on how we can support you because this is important not only for Upper Nicola, but for the province, and not only for the province, but for Canada, and not only for Canada, but for the world, because it'll be a project that will set the benchmark for other similar projects, not only in Canada, but around the world, and that dream is already there. We're already talking about plant number 2 at Upper Nicola. And right behind that is nitrogen. And I was like, stop, guys. You're blowing my mind apart. Now we're talking carbon. Now you're talking nitrogen. And they both work in the same way. And there's similar interactions and benefits to the environment. But let's continue talking about that. Like I don't know nothing about carbon. Now we're bringing in nitrogen, and I don't know anything about that other than what I learned in high school. So let's talk about it, because the world is talking about it. And that's why it's so important that I'm here and talking with you and talking with others about what we're doing, because we see a way of how we as Native people can be really involved in helping Mother Earth survive. Because if we don't do our part, if we're not involved in what's needed to clean up our craziness out there, then our livelihood is gone. All of our livelihood is gone, and the world will change to something that we have never seen before, and that is scary. So I have a lot of fears about where we're at right now, but at the same time, I see that there are opportunities out there. Economic is important, but more important, helping Mother Earth.
Well, I mean, that's such a beautiful and inspiring message, and I think I had a lot of questions, but I think you've really answered all of them, so eloquently throughout that. Maybe before we leave, could you just talk a little bit about, if people are interested in this project, how can they follow along? How can people maybe support it? What do you need to really make this happen and make it a success?
That's one of the things that we're working through right now. Because of the technology and ownership of the technology, we are really holding that tight. But looking at the overall project itself, we're going to need partners. And not only partners, but to share the experience that we went through. And we want to do that. I want to do that. It's so important, not only for us to understand the technology and how it's going to work and how it's going to help our environment, but also look at the consequences of what's going to happen at home. We think that because we're going to create wealth, that everything's going to change and everybody's going to be happy. No. There are a lot of things that we have to take into consideration when you're dealing with community. When you look at the community of Upper Nicola, all res school survivors, we've all gone to residential school, each and every one of us, including myself. And there were so many traumas that came with that. And because of what happened a couple of years ago in Kamloops, the discovery of the 215, it has absolutely turned our world upside down. And now dealing with that trauma and how we deal with that trauma, the anger, the shame, the craziness, that how one sees the world, and there's so much anger out there. And when you're looking at something like this, have to be really careful in how we approach it. You have to know your community and how to work with them or to talk about things like this with them so that there's some buy-in. Because if they don't buy it, the thing dies. And we don't want to see it die. So we've been nurturing our community to bring forward change. And the project has something to do with it. The two that we're working on right now have something to do with it, but more importantly, bringing our people back to a space where they feel included and being a part of something. Because res school separated us as families, as children, as community, and put in a system of governance that is so foreign to us and keeps us divided, keeps us fighting amongst ourselves, family against family, person against person, community against community, nation against nation. So a few years ago we said we have to change this. If we're going to survive as people, then we have to change how we take care of ourselves. So we're looking at our governance system. And we have laws that nobody really talks about, but we have laws that are out there, and we tend to ignore them. And I'll follow whatever the Department of Justice says, this is how we're going to do it, how the Minister of Children and Family says, this is how you're going to do it, or how the Regional Director General from Indian Affairs says, this is how you're going to do it, and that's how we do it. So we've done that, and it just doesn't work. So changing that environment and that perspective of who we are as people, that has to move along as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a challenge, yes. It's a lot of hard work, yes. I got bruises to prove that it's a challenging role to be playing and bringing forward change. But at the same time, what I mentioned way back is when you dream, allow that dream to come true.
That's really, such a beautiful message. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that with us, and for talking about this project and the sort of hopeful message you take out of it. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. And to everyone watching, thanks again for joining us. You can find this and lots of other carbon removal related content at carbonremovals.org. Hope you've enjoyed this special installment, and see you next time.